Welcome everybody back to Veil of Sound, back to our daily interview marathon here during our Christmas time. I hope that you've already enjoyed the first ones you've seen, and I think you're gonna enjoy this one. We had already the pleasure of talking to Steve until a few months ago when we were talking about the upcoming tour that he did back then in July. Everybody who has seen that must say that it was once again awesome and really, really cool. And this time we thought, okay, let's talk a little bit about Neurot Recordings, which he is running basically nowadays. So first of all, Steve, thanks for joining the show.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. And we just mentioned it in our little talk before we started this recording. Steve and I are basically at the other ends of the same night. My night has just ended. His started. So it's a very, very interesting situation. Of course, the development of Neurot Recording is closely recorded to Neurosis, but we are not going to talk about Neurosis. Steve sat down for us a little bit in advance and thought about 10 records that for him define the sound of Neurot Records, which is a very, very interesting thing because he could have chosen lots of records by lots of famous bands. Not to say that the bands that he chose are unknown. They are pretty known. But for example, he did not choose ISIS. He didn't choose Oxbow, Made Out of Babies, Battle of Mice. You could name a lot more. Current 93, which has been released through Neurot, if I remember correctly. So he chose 10 records. And we'll also get to the question, why not 10 other ones? But before we do that,
let's start with that one.
Before we do that, how democratic is the label nowadays? Is it your label, or is it a label that you run with other members of Neurosis? How is it now?
So the way it's always been is it's always been run out of my house. It's always been run out of my home, with different people assisting me. Mm-hmm. But Neurosis, being the founders of the label, we agree artistically on what should be released. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the time, I mean, it comes down to, guys will bring me ideas, or they also just trust my decisions that I will represent the brotherhood well.
Mm-hmm. When did you guys ever have a feeling that this is more than a vehicle for the Neurosis releases, re-releases, and everything related to Neurosis?
Pretty early on. I mean, initially it was formed with the idea of eventually having our own home for our own stuff. It began with primarily getting the rights back to Souls at Zero and Enemy of the Sun, at a similar time to when Times of Grace was coming out. I don't exactly remember the exact chronology, but we had also wanted the idea for a place for Tribes of Neurot, and we had the Grace companion disc coming out to go along with Times of Grace. We had some Tribes of Neurot material that we wanted to release, and so we thought, okay, this is a great place to start with these few items, and then we branched it out a little bit with more side projects with my first solo record, and then almost immediately realized that we needed to, in the same manner that we were given assistance when we were coming up by labels, you know, that people helped us get our music out there. We thought that we would do the same thing for our community and give something back and find artists that we felt an affinity for, that we felt a kinship with. Not trying to find a sound, but trying to find a spirit, you know, I think, which leads me to answering that question you asked that I said, let's do that first. Why these 10 and why not some other 10? And that's because you can't define the sound of Neurot Recordings. It's really diverse. It's really all over the place. And we never wanted our band to feel pigeonholed into any category or genre. I mean, and we grew up with record labels like Discord and SST and Alternative Tentacles, which you knew it would be interesting, but you had no idea what it was going to sound like. Yeah. You know, and that's, you know, it's part of us coming up in mid-'80s DIY punk rock and being inspired by everything we were around. And we wanted to be able to put out anything from beautiful ambient music to instrumental music to noise to heavy rock music of all flavors, you know? Yeah. Whatever moves us. It just has to move us.
Yeah. Which is also very interesting when one looks at the choices that you have. You know, if anybody tries to pigeonhole a few of these records, I think it's very, very hard because many of the bands that you've chosen and also many of the records that you've chosen are in a way highly eclectic, which I personally love to bits. You know, I just love that when a record is more than just genre A, B, or C, or maybe A and B. But a lot of the records that you've given us here on this list are actually very, very diverse. So I also looked it up. The first non-Neurosis related releases, my goodness, how many R's, were this Hungarian band Vágtázó, Halottkémek, translated into English as Galloping Coroners, which again I find is a wonderful band name. Then it was Isis, Tarantel, Vitriol, and Zeni Geva. We will talk about two of these a little bit more in detail. But it's interesting that you've just basically given the answer to my next question. I was thinking about a red thread going through all of these 10 records, and it basically already says, you know, it's more, is it more like a kindred spirit that you need to feel with these bands?
Yeah, I'm primarily the music has to move us, and but also there has to be some sort of, if we're not already friends, that, you know, that we feel that we come from the same place, or that we want to honor something. You know, that we want to celebrate something. You know, many of the people we've released are our peers and people we know, people we've met on the road, and others like Vágtázó, Halottkémek are more like legendary heroes in their own country and completely unknown in the United States, you know, and just really inspiring to me personally. And so there's a million reasons why, you know, a few times we've played some demos that have come in. We don't like taking demos, especially now in the digital age. There's just too much shit out there, and we don't have time to listen to it, you know? So stuff has to happen organically. But there were a couple that were just kind of like randomly grabbing something that looked interesting out of the demo pile and throwing it on.
So, you know, let's maybe do it a little bit in the following way. I'll give the details of a record. You maybe say a sentence or two on each record, what it means to you, what it also means to Neurot Recordings. And then to basically all of them, I found a very, very interesting aspect. that one can connect to this particular record. And the first one on your list was not the first non-Neurosis band, but it was the second one. It was not Vágtázó, Halottkémek. We'll also talk about that one in a moment. But it was Zeni Geva and their 10,000 Light Years, which was released on May 15th, 2001. And before now anybody says, but it was released on a different date in my country, maybe, but this is the American release date, and I looked them all up. So May 15th, 2001. Zeni Geva is one of those mysterious, not what means mysterious, but enigmatic master bands of old that is revered by all those people who heard them or who found them. What does the record mean to you and to Neurot Recordings?
That is one. Zeni Geva holds a very special place in our heart. When we were first kind of morphing from our early kind of punk rock version of ourselves into our more multi-dimensional with keyboards and samples version of ourselves, and we were starting to try to branch out and find different places to play and different bands to play with. You know, we had met some people in San Francisco who Mason Jones and Eldon M, and they were old school San Francisco heads who were into really obscure and interesting music. And Mason was an expert in Japanese music. And he was booking a show with Zeni Geva and a band from Texas called the Pain Teens, who also became dear friends and were incredibly inspirational. And so really seeing Zeni Geva just kind of blew our minds in the fact that they had some similar influences that we did. You could tell that there was some Swans in there, and that they were into heavy sounding guitars, but not heavy metal. You know, there weren't any metal tropes. It was heavy guitars, but it also wasn't Midwestern noise rock either. It was something different, something unique, something that only could have come from these guys in Japan, you know, that had a heritage of experimental and noise music mixed with their rock. And it was, so it was really, they were simultaneously friends and heroes, you know, because they, to me, represented the epitome of underground heavy music that, you know, putting out incredible stuff, whether people know about it or not. And, not only that, but I felt like 10,000 Light Years itself was kind of the most evolved version of themselves that they had. They clearly had evolved and progressed and brought a lot of different elements and a lot more fluidity and psychedelia into their sound for that one. Even some progressive moments, you know, and dare I say jazz influenced moments, you know, and it, so yeah, I mean, it's really special to me. When I think of it, I think of friendship, I think of originality and unique music, and I think of deep roots.
When we progress, I brought those records into a chronological order. So it's interesting that the first one in that order was the second one on your list, Zeni Geva. But when I looked it up and I saw that, I know I'm going to missay it again, but Vágtázó, Halottkémek, that theirs came out only 8 days after Zeni Geva's. Dancing with the Sun. If anybody is not familiar with it, it's a record that very, very well blends elements of world music or traditional Hungarian music with folk, with a few, well, ideologically probably punkish aspects. I somewhere found a tag which I think is hilariously bad. Shaman punk.
That does make sense, though. That
It
does
does
make
make
sense.
sense. Yeah.
I mean, it's a horribly overused word, shaman and shaman, as traditionally it really only applies to the Siberian tribe in which it comes from. But I think we all know what it means. And Attila, the singer of VHK, that'll save us from having to say it all the time. He is a world-renowned astrophysicist, but he also comes from a tradition of really understanding and being obsessed with the ancient primal shamanic traditions, again, for lack of the right word, of the Hungarian people. And so to me, calling it shaman punk or whatever, I mean, we could say it's world music like you did, and there are some traditional Hungarian music elements in there, but it's so much more primal than that. It's like reimagining what music may have existed before the modern folk, before the, folk music we know, and what may have been happening in the ceremonies in the ancient times. But it's also looking to the stars and looking for the origin of us all. So it's the origin of his people and his traditions and in his land and a connection to his land, and a looking into the stars for the connection and the origin of all of us in the cosmos. And they were definitely punk rock in the sense that they were together since the 70s, and they were banned by the communist government at the time for being subversive. All of those things combined just kind of form this gravitas and weight and depth that again made, like, they are superheroes, legends in their country. And so it was an honor to be able to try to introduce their music to our audience.
That's also an aspect that we'll come to in a moment. You've already also used that term, folklore. Very many people automatically associate it with folk music. And you at Neurot Recordings do have an ear for that kind of music, which of course also shows in the, for example, the cover version collection of the songs of Towns Van Zandt. Is that something that also very easily or quickly can strike a chord in you, a certain kind of scarcity in sound or brittleness or something like that? Is that something that rings a bell?
It depends. I mean, I wouldn't say I like folk music any more than I like any type of music. In fact, I dislike most music. I think I'm looking for the 0.01% of any genre, any style of music that I think is pushing the boundaries, speaking from a unique place, and again, it moves me. Like there's no saying what might move you. Like what moves me, I wouldn't expect it would move somebody else, because certainly what I see moves other people doesn't move me. But I mean, I think that there can be intense power in a full heavy rock band. There can be intense power in a decaying tape loop. There can be intense power of a person with a failing voice and an out-of-tune guitar, but they mean it. And you believe what they say.
Yeah. Authenticity, right?
Another overused word these days, but yeah, I mean, I think that really is incredible. That's what we all, I think those of us that are real music heads, that's what we want out of music. We don't want Well, some people do, and there's nothing wrong with it. Some people want a show. Some people want a character. Some people want to play dress up, you know, and wear costumes and such things and perform. And other people just want to express themselves in the most honest manner that they can, or that's all they know how to do.
Before anybody asks, because I know I've forgotten, VHK's record is called Dancing with the Sun, and it was released on May 23rd, 2003, something like that. I'm not sure if it was 2002 or 2001.
It had to have been right there in the it had to have been right there in the first
must be 2001
series of releases. Yeah.
And as you've mentioned it, you know, the next pick that you took could maybe not be further away music-wise or sound-wise, because chronologically the next one is Grails' Burden of Hope, released October 7th, 2003. Is that maybe one of the most enigmatic bands on Neurot? Because they totally, maybe even more than many, many, many other bands on Neurot, evade any kind of genreification.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the cliche is you never say any favorite words about any of your children, right? So I would say they're extremely enigmatic, and in some ways I think the records that they released after they moved on to other labels like would have been an equal fit or more of a fit as well than the first one, because they got into more heavy guitars and whatnot. But that Grails, it was just such a unique presence, and that was one of the rare ones that was a demo. That was we received a demo, and I don't know if it was the packaging or what it was that appeared interesting, but played it and was instantly really captivated. You know, I just to kind of frame it, at the time there was a lot of instrumental music was becoming trendy. But it was mostly of a style of bands trying to imitate like a Mogwai or
Godspeed,
or Godspeed You Black Emperor, or even though they were kind of newer to the game, even Explosions in the Sky, you know, made a big impact, and people were wanting to sound like some sort of version of these three bands, right?
Yeah.
The extended melodic parts, and Grails was unlike all of that and really created their own sound, which if I'm trying to use other artists as signposts or as markers just for understanding, they kind of scratched the same itch that maybe Low would take if they were instrumental. Maybe the Dirty Three, in their kind of the way the percussion and the melodies would interrelate, and also kind of Neil Young and Crazy Horse.
Yep.
Like, you know, like when a guitar comes out and it's very fluid and loose, but with distortion. And what I also found interesting about them is even though they're instrumental, I find them very lyrical. I find that some instrument is always the voice.
Definitely.
You know, like it's like that music still sings.
Yeah.
It's just either the guitar or the violin or something else that is
doing. Yeah. Do you like their latest one, the one that they put out a few months ago?
Oh yeah, very much so. Very much. And I was actually able to catch up with my friend Alex, who started Grails when I played in Copenhagen. We went out street drinking after my show, as you do in Copenhagen, and it was great to catch up. And we also just actually reissued that on vinyl,
exactly,
like the 20th anniversary edition.
Yeah. It's a second reissue already.
It's the first one we've done on vinyl. They did some self pressings, I think, somewhere along the line for touring. Some were even combined with the second record, Red Light, in the same package. But it's the first one that we have done.
That is also something that I wanted to connect here. You do reissues for various reasons, of course. For example, a record just isn't in stock, and there is a general demand for such a record, of course. Like you've also already mentioned it. Basically, one of the starting ideas was to get your own music to reissue it on your own terms. What does not happen too often is that you reissue stuff that has not originally been on Neurot. Sometimes you do that. And a perfect example would be Christ on Parade. What must happen for you to reissue a record that is not originally either Neurosis or Neurot Recordings?
I don't know if we have a rule, but that one is the most obvious reason for Christ on Parade is that's Noah.
Yeah, of course. So that is the connection that your band member says like, that would be cool.
Well, I mean, Christ on Parade and Neurosis, when we were coming up, we were brother or sister bands. I mean, we were inseparable. They were a huge inspiration on Neurosis. And both of those, before I joined Neurosis in '89, both of those bands were my favorite bands, my favorite local bands.
So it's a wet dream come true.
For sure. And and so yeah, that was, I mean, it's Noah's record label too, and his old record needed a home. And so of course it makes sense, just because of the inspiration on us as a band and him as a band member. And yeah, that's more, that's more how that happened. We don't often look for punk records from the 80s to reissue,
Also, some of them don't age that well.
It totally depends.
Yeah, totally depends. Before anybody asks, I think Noah's band, Tension Span, that you released last year, could that be the last Neurosis related release on Neurot Record? I think this year we did not have one, right?
Yeah, you might be right. Yeah.
And if anybody wants to know a little bit more about Noah and Tension Span, look up here on this YouTube channel. You can look up our interview with Noah that we did last year in this Christmas marathon. And if you want to know a little bit more about Grails, look up the interview that we did with Emil a few months ago. Wonderful, wonderful people to talk to, both of them, in a very, very different way, which I just remember. The next record on your list is one of the multitude of side projects of Justin K. Broadrick. It's final, and it's final, and it was record 3, released on February 21st, 2006. You've already mentioned it. There was no rule for you to pick a band apart from It Has to Touch You. But let's be honest, at that time, Justin K. Broadrick was already a big name. And I guess that Godflesh was also one of those bands that in a way inspired you, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think we were coming up about the same time, but yeah, for sure. I mean, that Street Cleaner record changed the game. For sure. So yeah, that was a huge record for us, especially as we were starting to explore using different sounds, and I mean, we'd always loved the mechanical aspects of Big Black and bands like that, but Godflesh kind of brought it to our world, you know, and it was really unique. And Justin's a great guy, and just his whole way of viewing music is very similar to ours. That, you know, we'd already been doing our Tribes of Neurot stuff, which was, again, there's not really a word for it. It could be noise, it could be ambient, it could be experimental, whatever. It's just free flowing sonic journeys, right? And whatever happens, as long as it has some sort of emotional context. And he was clearly doing that as well. And I don't know if Godflesh was active when the final record was coming out, because I know there was a time where, a couple of times, so. where it was.
I don't think so. Inactive. That was the beginning of Jesus. So,
but that was a really, it was a no-brainer, you know, like a guy who we respect and we like, his inability to be pigeonholed, his inability to be caught in the cage of definition, you know, because we've always resented that, you know, being reduced to a metal band or whatever. It just doesn't even, I hear that and it doesn't even feel like it applies to me, you know, like, or us. It's just, I don't know what would, but that's, you know, but he was always willing to push the boundaries, push his own limits, and take things out somewhere else. And that final record with the, you know, the kind of filtering loops, the bizarre atmospheres, the slowly morphing textures is really, really fitting to, I think, a lot of what we were into at the time, you know. Actually, we're always into that. But yeah.
And also that not only that way of not accepting any boundaries and not even seeing them, I think that is something that defines a lot of Neurot bands. It's not an utter denial of boundaries, because that means that you have to be agnostic and in some way see that there are boundaries, but very often just simply not even accepting their existence. A very agnostic way, in a way.
Yeah, I like the way you put that. Yeah.
Thank you. The next band might be the only one where I say, okay, that is clearly this. And that is Joop's clearing the path to ascent. If there is any kind of clearly doom record on that list, then it's this one. But on the other hand, when I revisited the record for this interview, I noticed that again, there is also some kind of folkish storytelling through the music happening. How did you feel what do you think about that record? How did it feel when you released that on September 16th, 2014?
Well, I mean, in hindsight, so at this point in time, Yob are incredible friends of mine, and I love that band so much. They're one of the most interesting heavy bands out there. And I have to say, in the whole early part of their career, I completely ignored it, because if something is doom or stoner, or I just think I don't even need to hear it. Like, I've got my Black Sabbath records and my early Saint Vitus, and everything else I don't need it, you know, for the most part, with rare exception, you know, like if I hear something like Burning Witch or Bell Witch, they both have the word witch in the name, they both deserve the title doom, you know, because they're just so crushingly anguished and intense, that, unlike the 5,000, Black Sabbath wannabe bands or the ones that just don't move me, even some of the more popular ones. I just don't get it, even being an old metalhead. But one day I was in Portland. I was going, forget what I was doing there. I might have been going to see when Jason had first joined Sleep. I thought, shit, I'm going to go see, Jason, my brother and my favorite drummer, go fucking play for Sleep. That'll be great. As they're old friends as well. And it was kind of their reunion time or whatever. And Alex from Grails and I were record shopping because he still lived in Portland. And we went to Jackpot Records. And there was a listening station that had Yob. And I noticed that Yob was the opening band for the concert that night. So I'm like, oh, all right, I'm going to check it out. And it was the record called The Great Cessation. And I put that record on in headphones there in public in this record store, and I was shredded. It was so great. Like the guitars were way more interesting than I would have assumed because of how people categorize them in this. Again, people unfairly pigeonhole things, and that affects the way some people perceive it, and I heard way more augmented chords and things that spoke to maybe a mutual love of Voivod, or maybe, more interesting things. And the different voices that Mike has, the higher one of which, if somebody had described it, I might be like, oh, I don't know, but that takes courage to sing like that, to sing in that kind of high pitched voice, but it is very unique. I mean, it might nod to some great rock singers of the past, but it is definitely his own unique take on things. Definitely. And makes it that much more original. And the fact that the rhythm section plays really interesting stuff, the arrangements are complex, they flow, they're more like movements than songs with just, riff, verse, chorus. They're these flowing, which of course is what we like to create. And so I fell in love with them immediately, and I met Mike that night and bought a record from him, and we just stayed in touch. And so to be able to put out that record was great, because they were definitely like starting to become more well known and start to like really crush it. And they still are. Their trajectory is going really, and now, one of my best friends on the entire planet, who was on my solo band with me these last 2 summers, and who has lived here with me for a while and was on Neurosis crew for years, Dave French, is now their drummer. So the whole thing just feels right. It was the right time for us to put out a Yob record, and for all of us involved. And it was a very positive experience, and I feel very proud of that one, because a lot of times and a lot of the records toward the end of this list is me falling back in love with a lot of heavy music, I think, over the last 10 years.
I saw that. We'll come to that. I know I'm gonna get shit for my pronunciation of the next one. So anyway, the next one on the list is Deafkids.
Configuração me to say how,
Configuração do Lamento. And I know I got it wrong. October 6, 2017.
The ow in Portuguese.
Yeah, that ow thing.
Interesting sound.
That is one of the most interesting bands, or that to me has been one of the most interesting bands in the last couple of years. in general.
I agree.
Yeah. What is more striking to you, the noise bits or the the crushing guitars? What strikes more to you?
I don't think I can isolate something. It's the combination of these kind of the way the riffs are repetitive. They almost sound loopish.
Yeah.
Like as if somehow somebody tried to take a Motorhead record and turn it into a Ministry record.
That's a perfect example. Yeah.
But on top of that, like mechanical nature of the guitar riff, you've got a Brazilian Ginger Baker playing very human heavy rhythms behind it. And that combination is incredibly unique. And they go off into riffland, and they also go off into experimental rhythmic noiseland. And I love all of it. And we've had the good fortune of playing with them in Brazil and also taking them on tour several times in Europe and the United States. And I just loved to watch audiences show up and see them for the first time. You know, I'd love to go out in the crowd and watch people go, holy shit, what is going on with these guys? You know?
There is another Brazilian band that I would like to drop in that context. Although they're very different in a way, but there is something in the sound of both bands that I think is a good way of showing Brazil's modern metal music, and that is Papangu's Holoceno. Again, I know I mispronounced it, but I think that is also something. And that is, when I looked at your list, that struck me. Neurot Recordings has never been a national label in a way. You gave me 10
from the beginning.
Yeah, exactly. You gave me 10 bands, and I looked it up. The countries that are basically indirectly listed are Belgium, Japan, Italy, Brazil, Hungary, the UK, and the US. Of course, the US has most of them, but 7 bands from 7 countries. That is very, very cool. And it also shows me that to you, the scene is not limited to one place. But here comes the question. Who gives you the insight on all of these countries? Is it just coincidental, or do you really have people, for example, from Brazil who say like, oh, you got to listen to Deafkids?
Yeah, no, definitely not. I mean, of course we have friends all over the world, you know, but we also travel the world, and we've, you know, I've been to Europe every year of my adult life, you know, since 1992, you know, basically I've been to Europe every year for one reason or another. And also, I think if I look back to being a teenager, even before I had a car, before I had a driver's license, I was trading cassette tapes with people all over the world with weird music, because back then there was no internet, you know, in the early 80s to mid 80s. And all we had was Maximum Rock and Roll magazine and paper pens and stamps. And we would find ads for other people who were interested in trading. You know, you couldn't find international records. If you could, if you were lucky, but it wasn't like it is now. You know, you'd be lucky to find an import of like a Swedish hardcore band or you know, a Belgian noisecore band, you know. But luckily we had some labels like Alternative Tentacles that would do things like put out some of those bands, but still a lot of it was you had to track it down. And things like, like I just listened to recently, MDC, Millions of Dead Cops, Multi-Death Corporations, they put out the Peace compilation. Which is one of the most incredible compilations where you had bands from all over the world, you know, and that opened your mind up to, there's stuff going on. And back then there was less cross-pollination of sound. And bands truly sounded unique. Polish bands sounded like Polish bands. Hungarian bands sounded like Hungarian bands. Swedish bands sounded like Swedish bands, you know. Everybody had their own unique take. And so really I guess mostly it's luck. Like finding Deafkids, for example, was seeing the website Cult Nation made a post saying the best band you've never heard. And me being an eternal pessimist went bullshit. But to prove that I was right, I clicked play on the sound file and I listened. I was in the office right over there and I listened to that entire record 2 times in a row without stopping. I was blown away and emailed the guy at Cult Nation, said, you got to get me in contact with these guys. This is incredible. You know, I think it was already released on cassette only in Germany or something like that. But yeah, but yeah, you know, it's I think it's just being a lover of music and being open-minded. You know, it happens a million different ways.
The next record, and here we jump from one South American place to Western Europe. The next record on your list was Amenra's Mass 6, released October 20th, 2017. Is this maybe the most black metalish record on Neurot?
I'm not sure I understand modern category and terminology. For me, black metal is still a Venom record.
Okay.
And all these types of death metal, black metal, I don't understand the difference. I mean, I know what Norwegian black metal is from the stereotype, right? I guess if I'm using that, if I try to, I would almost think that Dark Buddha Rising is more from Finland.
Yeah.
Is probably more so.
That is a very, very good question. Thinking about it,
Amenra never plays fast. Amenra never plays fast. There's never a blast beat in Amenra, not one.
Yeah, I know what you mean. There is not a blast beat. That is true. That is true. However, I think it is also not a classical post-metal band because of the vocals, you know. But I know what you mean.
Yeah, but it's a real scream. Whereas I think the heavy metal screams are more affected monster type screams. You know, there's a difference between somebody from the diaphragm truly screaming as loud as they can, and somebody more making a sound effect.
Yeah. That is true. And that, of course, is the difference, for example, to Dark Buddha Rising. I don't know if my friend Marco would agree with Dark Buddha Rising being black metal, but
I don't think they're black metal. I just think maybe they might lean more that direction. I guess, but again, those categories don't really mean anything to me because, I mean, they to me are more like progressive dark psychedelia, if I was going to call it something, you know. But Amen Ra is more of a I don't know. I don't know how to describe it. It's
Well, we can agree that it's probably a very, very unique band in its own approach, right? Connecting the music to their own church. And what always strikes me about the band, and that is something that I think is similar to Neurot Records. They are very much a product of their scene, yet they are never trying to be in a certain scene. You know, they're obviously a part of that whole H8000 hardcore scene in Belgium, but they transcend that, and that is something that is similar with Neurot. I think, you know, there are clear roots of Neurot Recordings, obviously, but by now the label has transcended all of those. Let's go on to the next choice, and I find that is a very, very interesting one. Kowloon Walled City, Piecework, released October 8th, 2021. It's a very interesting choice because I know that many, many people would choose one of our earlier records, maybe Grievances or so. But I think I know why you chose Piecework instead of Grievances. I think, to me, Piecework is one of the best combinations of a kind of folkish scarcity and heavy post-metal. How did you react when you first heard that record? Before releasing it, of course.
Blown away. Yeah, blown away. I wouldn't call it folkish. I would call it an exercise in restraint.
Yeah, that is a very good point. Yeah.
Like it's because there's no strumming guitars, there's no folk melodies. There is incredibly interesting guitar interplay with going back and forth constantly between harmony and dissonance, but you know, relying a lot on the lower gain tones, the slower beats, the leaving a lot of air, a lot of room to breathe between hits, and then only coming in to crush when it's really required. You know, and just again, and then back, holding it back, but barely. It just feels like it's barely held back, like it's about to break down and cry or scream, you know, and then when it unleashes, it does so. And you know, Scott Evans has become a really good friend over the years, and it's been really a pleasure to work with him. I love the sound of his recordings. I love the attention to detail and the care in which he puts in to overseeing everything with the group, and how much they care about how their stuff is represented. You know, it speaks very it speaks in a way that resonates very much where I feel like I come from, you know, and just not wanting to be misrepresented, or not wanting to play any fucking games out there that don't have anything to do with the true spirit of the music.
That is true. There is no hidden agenda with Kowloon Walled City. The next one was one of the first opening bands for Neurosis that I ever saw. Not the first or second, but one of the earlier ones out of all my Neurosis concerts. And that is UFOMAMMUT's Fenice, which you released last year, May 6, 2022. That is one of the most long-standing Neurot bands, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Maybe the most.
Is that now already some kind of family?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, you know, I wish we lived closer and could see each other more often. That's a band that we kind of got to know slowly over time, you know, first actually as the illustrators, as they were doing posters for us and for Roadburn, and then we took them on tour and started really, oh, they're the same. This art collective and this band are the same people, and they're doing some really interesting, unique stuff. And then we decided to work together on some records, and it's been a while now. And yeah, I love working with them. They keep getting better and better.
Yeah.
I think they keep really transcending the labels that people would put on them, you know. Yeah. I think when we first came across them, people would be quick to put them in the kind of like when Roadburn Festival first started. It started as kind of a stoner rock psychedelic festival, but it quickly branched out and to just being an open-minded, you know, music festival. And I think, you know, they definitely, while they could have fit back in the day in that kind of limitations, they've definitely blown those doors wide open. They've, you know, of course, coming from a group that used to use projections, their use of projections and visuals, their use of technology to their advantage, you know, in a very human way, with samples and extra textures and psychedelia, and just their records are getting more and more different. They got such great tones. They're really into crafting these aggressive guitar tones that are wonderful, and changing it up. You know, they have a really unique vision that keeps evolving, and I can't wait to see what's coming next.
That's true. What also connects UFOMAMMUT to the last band on your list is the fact that both bands have been interviewed here on the Veil of Sound channel. So if anybody wants to know a little bit more about Fenice or about the next record, check out our archives. The next band, last band, is also one of the most recent releases on Neurot. And it's Great Faults, Objects Without Pain. Which, by the way, was a very, very nice and perfect birthday gift for me this year when it came out on September 15th, 2023. And is that maybe one of the great follow-ups at the moment to bands like Unsane? Because that's what I hear a lot in there.
Yeah, I didn't make that connection. Yeah, I don't know. I didn't. Honestly, all I heard when with Scott Evans, who recorded it from Kowloon, he's the one that put that in my hands. But I was paying attention to them on their previous release as well, because Scott had posted about recording it, and I checked it out because I like hearing what Scott does in the studio. And I really liked their last recording. But this one was just kind of unhinged, I guess is what I would call it. It just really, really pushes out there in all these different directions and goes really full anguish. You know, it's really relentless. It's almost too much to listen to at times, you know, which is a good sign, you know.
Yeah, very often, right?
Definitely periods in our musical career where we wanted to make it entirely too much. and yeah, it's almost listener abusive, you know. It's like there's listener friendly records and there's listener unfriendly records. It's definitely unfriendly, but in a way that those of us who like that type of music, it just does it, you know. It just really does it. And I was really blown away by the compositions and the aggression and the emotion.
Yeah, it's also listener unfriendly when you follow the story of it, right? It's a very, very dark story behind those lyrics. So Steve, first of all, thanks for those 10 records. We could have spoken about many, many more. As I said, there is no Oxbow, there is no Red Sparrows, Made Out of Babies, Current 93, ISIS, you name them. Which also shows the amazing quality of the Neurot backlog. But one question is, how hard was it for you to choose those 10 records?
It took a minute because I felt guilty. Well, and initially when I was communicating with Rosie about doing this, they said 5. You want to choose 5 records, and I'm like,
that's what I said.
I can't choose 5. There's no way. There's no way I could choose 5 records from this catalog and have it representative of the depth of sound. And I knew right away I wouldn't do any Neurosis records or Tribes of Neurot records or any records that I've been a part of,
Or also any other one in Neurosis. That was a very good thing. Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So I was just going to make it about, other people that we've worked with. And so it felt important to bring in kind of the combination of the early ones, the heroes, to bring in the friends, to bring in the new blood, and to bring in some outliers, that represent the different, some of the different directions that we go in our musical interest.
Just a few more questions before I leave you for the night. Is there any way that you have an idea of which record is Neurot's best-selling record? Or is that too difficult?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, obviously the Neurosis records.
Yeah. Probably.
Yeah. I mean, we put out strange music. And it's hard to sell strange music. And like this record label is definitely a labor of love. Nobody earns, except for the people we hire to work on it. Nobody, there's not any profit split for us as the owners, it all just goes back into having a record label. It's a lot of work, and a lot of times I'd rather be in this room than in that room,
Yeah.
But ever since I was a teenager, I wanted a punk rock record label. So be careful what you wish for.
Well, none of the two of us ever wanted in our teenage years. I guess none of us wanted to be a teacher, right?
No, definitely not. Yeah. And to think that seemed like good money that should tell you something else. Yeah. Like, oh wait, I get paid to do this? But yeah, I mean, I'd say our stuff is pretty solidly underground. I mean, the Yob record did well, continues to do well. As far as like, bigger stuff, but yeah, I mean, it's clearly the Neurosis catalog, which keeps it all moving.
Is there a band that you would like to work with? Where you say like, it hasn't happened yet, but if I could, for Rolling Stones.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Jimi Hendrix. Off the top of my head, no, but I'm sure there are. I'm sure if I was, thinking about it, I mean, I love music. There's a lot of great bands out there. As much as I dislike most music, there's great stuff happening.
It's also interesting that you have now released 2 more records this year that I like a lot, and that are very different in a way. You've released False Fat. Is that your own one? Is that another homage of yours to your crust punk roots?
That's more like working with friends. That's
Okay.
kind of like, you know, I mean, that's definitely a different record because it's not a crust punk record. It's, you know, it's something more, I don't know, like what you heard in a lot of Stig's work with Amoebics. You always heard a little bit of Killing Joke in there or some post-punk influence, you know, some older stuff. And he's an older guy, you know, so. And Roy, we've known since we were first touring the East Coast and played with Nausea and stayed with them. And you know, obviously we've been fans of Discharge since before we had a band, but JJ being a younger member, we met him when Discharge and Subhumans played our 30th anniversary in London. And so it was really just kind of staying in touch, and JJ approached us. Actually, I think Igor Cavalera might have sent us our way, because we were putting out the Pet Brick record, and he thought we would be a good home for that, and so it just made sense. I mean, Amoebics, Discharge, Nausea.
Who could say no?
Who could say no?
And
the X Everything record is the second one. Yeah, we just did.
Yes, that's exactly what I wanted to talk about. That is a record that just simply blew me away. Because again, not trying to pigeonhole a band, but the way that they, for me at least, combine Unsane and Kowloon Walled City into their very, very own version of hardcore. That's amazing. You know, did you approach them? Did they approach you?
I think, again, that was Scott. Scott saying, hey, John's got a band. I just recorded it. It's great.
It is.
So it's actually because of Scott that we've got Great Falls and X Everything. So I guess Scott's our eyes and ears and A&R man down in Oakland, California.
So send him a lot of respect. He has a good ear.
Yeah, but yeah, that record, I was really surprised. John's, because I'm used to the guitar work in Kowloon Walled City, and to hear, like we talked about piecework being restraint, there is zero restraint from the guitar point of view in X Everything. In fact, it's like guitar heroics. Yeah. It's just completely fucking bonkers. Yeah. With a real intensity, and you know, the rhythm section to glue it all together and the vocals to send it over the top. It's a really intense and great record, you know.
It is. Is that, you've already mentioned that indirectly, are these bands also some kind of revitalization for Neurot? Not that the label ever needed.
That's assuming that we've ever been unvital.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like, but not assuming that the label was ever dead. But you know, those are two new bands that fit perfectly, and at the same time are very unexpected in a way.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I feel like it's a continuation. It's definitely an exciting time, and to have all these, to have the Grails reissue, the Great Falls record, the False Fed record, and the X Everything record all happening at the same time is definitely like an intense kind of crazy period, you know. Definitely like a lot to do all at once. But yeah, I mean, I guess in a way, all that stuff happening at the same time makes it feel like, okay, yeah, we are in it. Because, you know, sometimes you go 6 months without putting something out, or you have a slow year, and it's, you know, sometimes you need a slow year to catch up and sell some records instead of manufacturing records all the time. But
yeah, and also I guess, when you have your own musical endeavors and projects, that also takes a lot of time. Therefore, that is also the last question that I will ask you. And before anybody complains why we do not have a quick fire round this time. First of all, Steve and I already had one in August, I think, July, August, something like that. So if you want to hear a quick fire round with Steve Fontil, just visit the old interview. And second of all, it's 6:13 over here, and I got to get ready for school. Steve's got to go to sleep in a few hours. So my last question: can we expect, or when maybe, can we expect new music from Steve Fontil in any form of incarnation?
I have some Harvestman. I have a Harvestman triptych, 3 LPs.
Ooh.
The first 2 are done. I'm just waiting. I just got the master, waiting for finished artwork. The second one, the audio's done. I need to get it mastered and get the artwork. And the third one I'm finishing. And I don't have an exact time frame for that, but I would like to get all 3 of those out next year, spaced out. So 3 LPs related, Harvestman LPs. And actually, before we got on Zoom, I was going through my songs for the next solo record. So, yeah, there's things in motion.
Steve, thanks for all your time. Thanks for doing this so late in the evening. And it was a pleasure as always. So thank you very much.
Yeah, and thank you, man. Thanks for your time. And thanks for getting up early so I didn't have to, for a change.
Yeah, once in a while, right? So enjoy the rest of your day. Talk soon.
All right, have a good day at school. Bye.
Yeah, tomorrow.